Welcome to Biggest Spoilars, the destination for exclusive spoilers, latest updates.
As the occasion began, we picked up with Steffi Riri Andre reiterating to Luna that her baby is a child, not an escape plan. In turn, Luna called Steffi tone-absorbed to suppose she was still a trouble and claimed that her mammy would be the last thing on her mind once she got sprung. What's more, but of course, she remained confident that Bill and Katie would let their grandchild be born behind bars. "You suppose you know Bill?" "You do ain't," Steffi informed Luna, adding that the baby didn't make the nut job a Spencer, it just made her a bloodsucker. Still, Steffi didn't go so far as to call what Luna did to what it was rape. Why will this show admit so freely that she's a killer but not that she's a robber? Strange, Katie makes defenses for Bill. At the Spencer manse, Will fretted that the Luna situation was asking too much of Electra. Bill assured him, however, that the Luna of it all would be over in 9 months. At that point, she'd have no contact at each with Will or the baby. The millionaire added that he'd been talking to a counsel and was confident that the guardianship case would be open and shut. And with those words, could he conceivably have possessed himself more? Talk about tempting fate. Once Bill took off, Katie and Will recapitulated everything that had happened to upend his love with Electra. Katie managed to pull off the pretzel sense to cut her ex-husband slack for having been conned by Luna. "He feels veritably shamefaced," Katie said. "He's not gonna let her brainwash him again, for running?" "You betcha." Bill lights into Luna. After Steffi left the captivity, Luna was surprised to find that she had yet another caller. "Bill. Is it just you?" she asked. "Yep, she's so delulu, she really allowed. Will would have come to see her." As if. Bill, sounding like the Bone Bill of history, gruffly explained that Luna's gestation didn't produce any bond between her and his family. In fact, he continued, as soon as the baby was born, he was going to take it from her. "The biggest mistake of my life," he growled, "was seeing any hint of redemption in you. I should have left you in then to spoilage. It doesn't be frequently, but when he's right, he's right." Bill wasn't done yet, moreover. The same influence that he'd used to get Luna freed, he'd now used to ensure that she no way stopped pressing license plates. Her response? The Luna interpretation of the sad face emoji over. Steffi reunites with her parents. At the Precipice house, Ridge and Taylor burst in looking for Steffi, only to learn from Finn that their son went directly to captivity to defy Luna. While staying for Steffi to return, her hubby and parents bandied her response to the Luna news and how understanding she'd been that No Bone had advised her about the stunner to which she'd be coming home. When Steffi got back, she was astoundingly unreactive to the fact that, while she was abroad, her father ditched her mama and incontinently married Brooke. At first, that is. Shortly, Steffi did express her disappointment, although in important gentler terms than we might have anticipated, or, for that matter, hoped. "Daddy sure gets down with some bleep. Luna has her cellmate beat her up, and not for the first time." As the occasion drew to a close, Steffi noted again that her hubby is handsome, and he expressed how important he'd missed her. "All that matters now is that you're back," he said, beaming. "As for Luna, she's in captivity, and she'll no way harm you again." Oh, notorious last words, Finn. Meanwhile, Bill came home to his manse and assured Katie and Will that vile critter hadn't gotten to him. He indeed chortled that Luna had allowed using the word grandchild would work like open sesame on her jail cell doors. Eventually, in captivity, Luna's cellmate snickered that her sugar daddy hadn't come to deliver her this time. In response, Luna told her, "I need you to do it again," meaning beat her up. "Just not the stomach," Luna whisked to add. Her cellmate was only too happy to oblige. The Los Angeles sun, a relentless, brilliant orb, poured its golden light over the city, making the sleek, modern architecture of Spencer Publications gleam like polished obsidian. Inside his penthouse office, on the highest floor, William Bill Spencer Jr. stood before a wall of glass, his kingdom laid out before him. From this vantage point, the world was orderly, a chessboard where he was the undisputed master. He sipped his Macallan, the amber liquid catching the light, a ritual of victory. He had won. His rival was crushed, a threat neutralized. The feeling was intoxicating, a familiar warmth that spread through him, confirming his power. But beneath the surface of that triumphant veneer, a cold, hard stone of unease had begun to form in his gut. It had been 3 days since he'd received the call. A terse, official voice from the women's correctional facility where Luna, his wife, was being held on trumped-up charges he had secretly orchestrated. The voice had said there had been an incident. A scuffle in the common area. Luna had been hurt. She was in the infirmary. Bill had dismissed it initially. Prison was rough, it was to be expected. It was a calculated risk in his larger game. She was safe, they said. Stable. He would have his lawyers expedite her release now that his business objectives were met. He would be her hero, swooping in to save her from a predicament he had engineered. The narrative was perfect. Yet, the stone of unease refused to dissolve. It was fed by the silence that followed. His calls to the warden went unanswered. His personal attorney, usually unflappable, sounded strained, evasive. "We're gathering all the facts, Bill. It's complicated." Encouraging words. The phone on his desk, a minimalist slab of black glass, buzzed, shattering the silence. It was his brother, Justin. Bill's jaw tightened. Justin had always been the conscience he never wanted, the voice of morality that grated against his own ruthless pragmatism. Bill, Justin's voice was uncharacteristically soft, devoid of its usual judgmental edge. "We need to talk. If you're here to lecture me about the Forrester deal, save your breath," Bill snapped, the defensiveness automatic. "It's not about the deal, Bill. It's about Luna." Justin paused, and the silence on the line was heavier than any accusation. Katie heard from Donna, who heard from Brooke. "There are rumors about what happened at the prison." Bill's grip tightened on his glass. "What rumors?" "They're saying it was more than a scuffle, Bill. They're saying she was targeted. That a group of women, they beat her. Badly." A cold trickle of fear, a sensation so foreign it was almost unrecognizable, traced a path down Bill's spine. He looked out at his perfect, sun-drenched city, and for the first time, it seemed like a painted backdrop, fragile and false. "She's in the infirmary." "She's stable," Bill stated, repeating the official line like a mantra, trying to convince himself. "Is she?" Justin's voice was gentle but firm, a lifeline thrown into the churning waters of Bill's sudden dread. "Brother, you need to go to her. Now. Put aside the business, put aside the pride. Just be her husband." "This is none of your concern, Justin," Bill growled, but the threat lacked its usual fire. "It became my concern when you made her your wife," Justin countered, his tone shifting from encouraging to imploring. "Listen to me. I've stood by you through a lot. I've justified, I've rationalized, I've cleaned up messes. But this is a line. If something has happened to that young woman because of your games, it will destroy you. Not your company, not your reputation, you. The man, deep down, that I know still exists. The man who loves her." The words, "loves her," struck a chord so deep and hidden that Bill physically flinched. He thought of Luna, not as a pawn, but as the woman who had looked at his hardened, cynical soul and seen something worth saving. Her laughter, like wind chimes in a sterile room. The way her hand felt, small and trusting, in his. "She believed in you, Bill," Justin continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "When no one else did. She saw a king where others saw a tyrant. Don't let her down now. Go to her. Your empire will wait." "She might not." The line went dead. Bill stood frozen, the encouraging words of his brother morphing into a terrifying prophecy in his mind. The penthouse, his sanctuary of power, suddenly felt like a gilded cage. The world outside the glass no longer looked like a kingdom, it looked like a judgment. Angry threats. The drive to the prison was a blur of smeared streetlights and the low, aggressive growl of his sports car's engine. Bill's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, denial, fury, and a burgeoning, gut-wrenching fear that was rapidly eclipsing everything else. He used his anger as a shield, fanning its flames. By the time he stormed into the prison administration building, bypassing security with a snarl that promised legal annihilation, he was pure, unadulterated Spencer Raff. He was no longer a worried husband, he was an avenger. He slammed his palms on the reception desk, making the corrections officer jump. William Spencer. My wife, Luna Spencer. Where is she? I want to see the warden. Now. The warden, a harried-looking man named Davies, appeared quickly, his face a mask of professional concern that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Spencer, please, let's discuss this in my office. We'll discuss it right here. Bill thundered, his voice echoing in the sterile, linoleum-lined hall. You told me she was stable. You told me it was a minor incident. Mr. Spencer, the situation was fluid, Warden Davies said, attempting to usher him away from the gawking staff. Fluid? Bill laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I'll show you fluid. I will own this entire facility by the end of the week. I will have your job, your pension, and your reputation. You will be lucky to get a job as a security guard at a mall. Now, take me to my wife. The warden's composure cracked slightly. Sir, she's in the infirmary. But I must warn you, her condition is more serious than initially reported. The physical trauma. What about the physical trauma? Bill's voice dropped to a deadly whisper, his face inches from the warden's. What aren't you telling me? It was then that a doctor in a white coat, looking exhausted and grim, emerged from a set of double doors marked medical wing. Her eyes found Warden Davies, then settled on Bill. Are you family of Luna Nozawa? She asked. I'm her husband, Bill said, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The doctor, Dr. Evans, nodded slowly. Mr. Spencer, perhaps you should come with me. She led him not to a patient's room, but to a small, bleak family consultation room, a space designed for delivering the worst news imaginable. There was a cheap vinyl couch, a box of tissues on a formica table, and the pervasive smell of antiseptic and despair. Where is she? I want to see her, Bill demanded, refusing to sit. Dr. Evans stood with her hands clasped, her demeanor calm but profoundly sad. Mr. Spencer, your wife was the victim of a severe assault. She sustained significant blunt force trauma to her abdomen. We did everything we could. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What do you mean, everything you could? Is she? He couldn't say the word. She's alive, the doctor said quickly, and a wave of dizzying relief washed over Bill, so potent it made him sway. But it was short-lived. However, the trauma. Mr. Spencer, Luna was in the early stages of pregnancy. Approximately 8 weeks along. Time stopped. The air was sucked from the room. Bill heard the words, but they were in a foreign language, nonsensical, impossible. Pregnancy. What? He breathed, the word barely audible. The assault induced a miscarriage, Dr. Evans said, her voice gentle but unflinching. We were unable to save the pregnancy. I am so very sorry for your loss. The words landed not as sounds, but as physical blows. Miscarriage. Loss. Your loss. Bill stumbled back, collapsing onto the unforgiving vinyl of the couch. The angry threats, the bluster, the empire, the power, it all crumbled into dust, leaving nothing but a vast, howling emptiness. A child. Their child. A son or a daughter he never knew existed, a future he had snuffed out with his own hubris and reckless games. He saw the doctor's lips moving, offering more explanations, condolences, but he heard nothing but a high-pitched whine in his ears. The room blurred. He had come here ready for a fight, ready to wield his power like a weapon. But this was a wound no power could heal, an enemy he could not intimidate or buy. He was no longer William Spencer Jr., Titan of industry. He was just a man, broken and hollow, sitting in a room that smelled of death, realizing he had just lost a part of his future he never even knew he had. The baptism of regret. The permission to see her felt like a condemnation. He was led to a private room in the infirmary. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the steady, mechanical beep of a heart monitor. And there she was. Luna lay in the narrow bed, dwarfed by white sheets, looking younger and more fragile than he had ever seen her. One side of her face was a canvas of ugly, purplish bruises. And 4 was taped to the back of her hand, and her eyes were closed, but the tracks of dried tears were visible on her swollen cheeks. Bill stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. The sight of her was a physical pain, a knife twisting in the void where his heart used to be. This was his doing. Every bruise, every tear, the profound loss that now shrouded her, it was all a direct consequence of his actions. He had put her here to gain leverage in a business deal. He had traded her safety, and the life of their child, for a few more points on a stock chart. He finally forced his legs to move, each step heavy with the weight of his guilt. He pulled a flimsy plastic chair to her bedside and sank into it. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers, which had signed billion-dollar deals and clenched into fists against rivals, now hovering over her bruised knuckles, afraid to touch her, to defile her further with his contact. Her eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain medication and a grief so deep it seemed to have no bottom. For a moment, there was no recognition. Then, her focus sharpened, and she saw him. There was no anger in her gaze. No accusation. Just a bottomless, devastating sorrow. It was worse than any hatred she could have mustered. "Bill," she whispered, her voice raspy and broken. "Luna," he choked out, his own voice a stranger's. "Luna, I didn't know." It was a pathetic, inadequate offering. A fresh tear escaped the corner of her eye and traced a path through the bruising on her temple. "I was going to tell you," she murmured, her words slurred and slow. "The day I was arrested. I took the test. I was so happy. I wanted to see your face. I wanted to tell you we were going to have a baby." Each word was a lash, stripping away another layer of his armor, flaying him alive. The image she painted, of her, radiant and happy, holding a positive test, wanting to share that joy with him, slammed into the brutal reality of the sterile room, the bruises, and the loss. He had stolen that moment from her. From them. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from his throat. It was a sound he had never heard himself make. He buried his face in the stiff sheets beside her arm, his broad shoulders shaking uncontrollably. The tears came then, hot and shameful, a torrent of anguish and self-loathing that he could not contain. "I'm sorry," he wept, the words muffled by the bedding. "I'm so sorry, Luna. This is my fault. All of it. My God, what have I done? What have I done?" He cried for the child he would never meet. He cried for the pain he had inflicted on the one person who had seen goodness in him. He cried for the man he had become, a monster who built his castles on the graves of his own happiness. This was his baptism. Not in water, but in the scalding, bitter tears of a regret so complete it felt like a death. The old Bill Spencer, the ruthless king of his own world, was drowning in them. He was being submerged in the horrifying knowledge that his greatest victory in business had resulted in the most catastrophic personal loss of his life. Luna's uninjured hand moved weakly, her fingers brushing against his damp hair. It was not an absolution, it was too soon for that, the wound too fresh and deep. It was a gesture of shared grief, a connection in the midst of utter desolation. He lifted his head, his face ravaged, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I'll make this right," he vowed, his voice thick with tears. "I swear to you, Luna, I will get you out of here. I will destroy everyone who had a hand in this. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you." But the words, even to his own ears, sounded hollow. How does one make up for the loss of a child? How does one atone for being the architect of such devastation? The angry threats he had made in the hallway now felt childish, a pointless rage against a tragedy that was, at its core, his own creation. He had come to the prison armed with threats and power. He was leaving it a shattered man, armed with nothing but the crushing weight of his remorse and the faint, fragile touch of his wife's hand, a touch that felt less like a connection and more like the final, gentle press of a seal on his own life sentence of guilt. The baptism was over. A new man was emerging from the depths of his despair, but what kind of man he would become was a terrifying, unanswered question. The only certainty was that the old Bill was gone, forever.